Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, and welcome to the first keynote lecture for 2026 of the Public Space Academy. I am Luisa Bravo, the founder and director of the Public Space Academy, which is the first free educational program dedicated entirely to public space, promoted by City Space Architecture, a non-profit organization based in Italy, in partnership with the Ove Arup Foundation based in London and with the general support of UN Habitat based in Kenya. I'm very glad to have this third year of keynote lectures, since this is an opportunity to share perspectives, opinions, and to showcase best practices around the world related to public space, engaging the best and most influential scholars, professionals, and urban innovators. As you know, we have the Keynote Lecture Series as an online engagement. All our keynote lecturers are invited every month to give a keynote lecture, and all the previous keynote lectures are available on the YouTube channel of City Space Architecture. But we also promote free courses that are available on our Learn platform, with different perspectives related to public space, with interdisciplinary approaches, methodologies, and practices. We also organize face-to-face workshops in Italy, in Europe, and in other cities around the world. So please subscribe to our newsletter to be always informed about our activities. So now I don't want to be too long with this introduction, because I think it's time to introduce our keynote lecturer. I'm very glad to have today with us Dr. Lakshmi Priya Rajendran from the Bartlett School of Architecture, University College London. Welcome, Lakshmi Priya.
Thank you so much, Luisa.
I just want to say something about you before giving you the floor for your lecture. Lakshmi Priya works at the intersection of architecture, urban studies, and storytelling. And she focuses on public space, spatial justice, and everyday life in cities of the global south. She's the director of Deco Lab, a collaborative platform exploring creative and decolonial approaches to research, pedagogy, and practice in the built environment. I also have to say that you joined since the very beginning the steering committee of the Public Space Academy. So we really appreciate your interest, effort, and commitment to support this initiative. So, as always, you will have around 45 minutes for your keynote lecture, and then in the end we will have a small discussion collecting also questions from the audience. So in case you have questions, please write your questions from the platform where you are watching now this lecture. Could be LinkedIn or YouTube. We will read and collect all your questions, and we will engage Lakshmi Priya into a very interesting conversation in the end. So now I'm glad to give you the floor to start your lecture.
Thank you so much, Luisa. It's always a pleasure to collaborate with City Space Architecture, because very like-minded people, shared purpose of understanding public spaces and its importance. Let me share my screen and okay. So as Louisa was saying, I work quite a lot in terms of interdisciplinary understanding of city imaginaries, with a particular focus on public space itself. So for me, why public space comes into a picture when we are talking about justice or equitable imaginaries of city futures, in the sense because public space in cities where city becomes visible, we all know, and it is where differences are encountered, where hierarchy are enacted and proximities are very importantly negotiated. And public space is often imagined as something which is democratic part of the city, open, accessible, and shared. But in practice, we all know that it is not neutral. Not everyone moves through it in the same way. Not everybody feels equally entitled to occupy it, and not every threshold is crossed with the same ease. So public space, particularly if you look in the global south and more so in India, which is where quite a lot of my work focuses on, is where caste becomes spatial, religion becomes visible, gender becomes embodied, and power is very ordinary. And so within this context, I also see it is also where justice is rehearsed or denied in very small everyday ways. For instance, if you look at, you'll be seeing in some of the slides which I'll be showing very soon, a pavement or a street corner, a temple entrance, a shared water tap. These are not just urban elements. These are where people negotiate their sense of belonging, identity, and equity and inequities. But because public space is shared, interestingly, it cannot hide inequality. And no, literally, it stages it, I would say. Which is why if we want to understand spatial social justice, not as an abstract principle, but as something lived, public space becomes the most revealing terrain. Not because it is ideal, and but because it is contested, and it is in that contestation I see quite a lot in my research projects, where we can see how cities are actually made and remade. So okay, public space. Why public space? I've said, but why story? So if public space is where justice is negotiated, as I said, then the question becomes, how do we actually study those spaces? How do we examine these spaces? And if you see architecture, urban planning, design, all helps us to understand, let's say, the material form of it, the spatial organization, zoning, access, regulation. While these are all essential, I feel that they often render space as surface, function, and frameworks. What they struggle to capture are the micro negotiations of which happens in the everyday life and unfolding within those frameworks. And as I said, the pause at the threshold, or a subtle rerouting of a body, and the way women would adjust her space at dusk, the way caste and religion becomes legible through proximity. These moments are very temporal, if you closely examine, and they unfold through encounters, and more importantly, they accumulate over time, forming strategies, tactics, and patterns. What unfolds over time requires a narrative, and story becomes a way of tracing these relations. And it also allows us to follow how the power circulates through ordinary interactions, and how belonging is felt or withheld, how memories are attached to a specific street or rituals which happens in those public spaces, and more importantly, how more than human presences like animals, infrastructures, weather, material objects participate in shaping those public spaces. So this presentation, where I'll be talking about public space as story today, emerges from a larger research project and a question where this was a project funded by the British Academy titled as Transgressing What is a Good City. The starting point of the project was very simple, and perhaps uncomfortable, I would say. The question was, who defines what is a good city, and on whose metrics, on whose standards, whose spatial ideals, what it means to be good. So across the global urban discourse, if you all see, good city is often measured through infrastructure, livability rankings, governance, sustainability indices. But these universal models rarely emerge from majority urban context, I would say. They travel, they circulate, they discipline. So what we do within the Decolab, the Decolonial Collaboratorium, is we asked within this project, what would it mean to develop decolonial approaches to just cities, not by importing models randomly, but by listening to lived negotiations, by attending to situated knowledge, which was quite important for us, and also by taking seriously the everyday. And when we were looking at quite a lot of other scholarship on good cities, often the narratives draw from dominant Western planning paradigms. But what happens when we ask the question from the margin, from the peripheries, through post-colonial urban experiences? So this project takes Chennai, a capital city of Tamil Nadu, one of the southern states in India, as a case to interrogate how colonial legacies continue to shape everyday life and public spaces. And using a decolonial lens, we sought to surface alternative imaginaries of city, one which is grounded in local heritage, memory, and everyday practices. So some of the key questions what we examined was, how does Chennai engage with or resist colonial residues in public space? And how do the post-colonial urban spaces in the city define or reconstitute the social and environmental practices of people? And lastly, what does it mean to experience the city in the interstices of past and present, the Western India, Madras and Chennai, and what such a possibility would lead us to? And to explore these questions, we used participatory workshops, storytelling methods, and collective mapping alongside interviews and quite a lot of archival research. What emerged is a creative methodology centered around storytelling itself. And for us, we felt storytelling was such a powerful medium to explore these questions. This powerful reflection by Rafat Aluri reminds us how over time, stories begin to replace our actual relationships with people and places. When the physical connection to a homeland is ruptured by violence, displacement, or erasure, what remains is often the memory, myth, and the narrative. So we hold on to stories because they offer us continuity, which is very critical. They carry the names, smells, laughter, and grief of a place we can no longer touch. But as stories becomes the only thing left, they also risk becoming substitutes, symbolic stand-ins for living and breathing connection. And this is quite valuable within urban research itself, because if you see here, storytelling is more than a method. We see it as a political act, drawing upon Lefebvre's The Right to the City. We are reminded the cities are not just built environments, they are lived spaces, and public spaces should be shaped by all who inhabit them, and not just the privileged few, which we have read in several of his works. Yet, if you see, both the colonial and the post-colonial urban development have always been marked by systematic exclusion, favoring elite visions while silencing the everyday experiences of the working class, poor, and the women. So urban research, too, has often mirrored this bias by privileging the dominant narratives. And so we felt storytelling offers a way to disrupt this dominant narrative, and it invites us to listen differently, to center voices that have long been sidelined, and to reimagine the public space not as a finished product, but as something which is contested, collective, and also an evolving space. And when you actually align this with a decolonial thought, storytelling becomes more than a method. As I mentioned, it almost becomes a resistance. It exposes and disrupts the colonial power structures embedded in the urban knowledge, space, and social relations. And it is through these imagined or reimagined narratives that marginalized communities reclaim voice, visibility, and power, challenging the hegemonic urban discourses and reasserting their right not only to be seen, but also to shape the city. Let me now bring this into a focus through our case study, Thiruvallikeni, or Triplicane, the anglicized version of the name, one of the Chennai's oldest and most politically layered neighborhoods, I would say. Once it was a central to British administration, its spatial logics, hierarchy, exclusion, segregation still persists, layered now with neoliberal privatization, which is happening globally, I would say, and also the real estate pressures. And these dynamics particularly affect the marginalized, in this case, Dalit Muslims and other marginalized groups, whose presence is continuously threatened in the name of development. To engage with this social, cultural, and political complexity, we developed what we call a polylogue storytelling framework, building on the dialogic theory, but also extending it, where polylogue makes space for many voices, realities, and temporalities to coexist. So in the study, we go through what we found from a case study as a story, using fiction as a methodology through three dominant narrative perspectives. First is we meet Aragi, the cow, a more than human narrator. Aragi wanders the neighborhood public spaces, observing rituals, tensions, and the sensory textures that are often invisible in human-centered accounts. Her presence disrupts our assumptions about who is allowed to speak in urban spaces and how the place itself is experienced. And second, we have Sundari, a homeless woman. Her narrative is drawn from the conversations with women living on the margins, like vendors, caretakers, but also those sleeping in the temple courtyards. Sundari's voice surfaces questions of dignity, displacement, and resilience, making visible the everyday negotiation which happens in the public spaces, and also how it structures the life itself. And finally, there is the reader, you, us, the researchers. So through the story mapping, the reader navigates between these perspectives, not as a passive observer, but as a co-creator of meaning. This challenges the authority of the researcher and invites reflection on how we consume and interpret stories of public spaces. And this approach, as I said, resists linear storytelling. Instead of one authoritative account, it embraces multiplicity. We use fragments, gossips, humor, and embodied experiences, which are often, unfortunately, ignored by urban research. So now I would like to play a short film which would take you through this polylogue. But let me just give you very briefly the background of the short film. So the key output of the project was we developed an interactive story map which traces the pre-colonial and how the public spaces and the whole neighborhood had been changing over time. And then we come to the present where Aragi, Sundari, and you, me, we go around the 4 streets, which was the actual case study of our project. And they take us through what they see, connecting us to the past, present, and also future. And towards the end, they go meet some of the residents. So what I'm presenting now as a film is just a bit of the conversation between Aragi, Sundari, and how the reader engages with those public spaces. And it's titled as Kadai. Thiruvallikeni is the name of the neighborhood. Madavidi is the name of the streets, and Kadai means story in Tamil. So if I can play the film to you, it's a 12-minute film, and it's subtitled, and you also have a voiceover, and it's very important for you to go understand the conversation for me to reflect upon the key themes which emerged from this project. I would now like to play the film.
So this is the most important part of Triplicane neighborhood. Can you see the temple? That's the famous Parthasarathi temple, where Lord Perumal resides.
Oh, I've heard some gossip about this place. Did you know there's a rumor that during the China war, there was a bomb that they were planning to drop on Triplicane to destroy Triplicane completely? Because of Parthasarthi's grace, the bomb fell into the Bay of Bengal.
Really? That's quite a story. This tank here is equally important, as the whole area got its name from it. The name Triplicane is an anglicized version of Thiruvallikeni, which comes from Thiru Allikeni, a sacred lily pond in Tamil. It refers to the pond in front of the Parthasarathi temple, which used to be surrounded by a large tulsi forest.
That's beautiful. But it is artificial now. The tank was rebuilt by the people from this neighborhood by pouring concrete onto the floor of the tank and connecting it to the drainage of the area. Now, whenever it rains, all the water flows into the tank. Isn't that wonderful? We don't have to be stranded in flooded water like the rest of the city.
Exactly. Let's go towards the temple. Ah, look at these flowers. So colorful, and the fragrance is amazing. I can't imagine the four streets of Thiruvallikeni surrounding the temple without these vendors.
It smells beautiful. Without these sacred flowers, any ritual feels incomplete. The streets are always busy with people visiting the temple every day. The gods in the temple even have their favorite days, flowers, and colors. Whatever is offered to Lord Perumal, flowers, fruits, coconuts, basil leaves, are all considered nirmalyam. They are treated as prasadam and should be discarded respectfully so no one steps on them. Some kind people give me some of these.
Lucky you. If we are hungry, we turn to garbage bins to see if we can find something or wait for someone to feed us.
I prefer asking people or waiting for them to offer me something. The neighborhood celebrates a lot of festivals during the year. Those are my favorite days as we get some food and money from people coming from outside. But I do notice they prefer to feed you over me.
Of course, I'm special. Feeding me is equivalent to feeding a god. People even feed me from their vehicles. They touch my forehead to seek blessings.
Yes, and that explains why there's cow dung everywhere.
But do you know my dung is used for rituals too? Some of the older residents purify the kitchen with dung first before they start cooking. Come on, let's walk down the road. Ah, vendors again. They have almost become part of the community, like friends to the residents. And look at this. Sometimes you can't even tell if it's a sacred place or just a tea shop. By the way, are these your belongings?
No, people just appropriate some space. As you see there, work, leisure, and home are quite intertwined in these streets.
I can see some shades going up near the temple. It seems they are preparing for some temple related event. While you were talking about the procession, I want to mention that while each temple has a big festival that happens once each year, in Parthasarathi temple, the processions happen very often. In the month of April, there is an Utsavam. In the month of June and July, there is a procession for the Narasimha. During Bogi and other festive occasions, there is a procession for Andal. Throughout the year, there are religious processions. People will never compromise on that.
Yes, I see. But for me, at least some shaded space during the summer.
However, what intrigues me is while these vendors and shops are integral to the neighborhood, I have heard all is not well between the temple and them.
Yes, I've heard that. The temple committee wants to keep the vendors out of the temple premises. The vendors who have held these shops for generations have refused to leave and have approached the court. We also feel the threat of evictions. 10 years ago, some of the shops were removed from the temple premises and shifted to the Mada streets. While some of the owners left, others still carry out businesses from the streets.
I can't imagine the temples without vendors. They are essential to its functioning. Things are indeed changing. Now look at the street. It has changed so much. I really loved the old traditional row houses that were here before. Now all the houses are being replaced by apartments. There are no open spaces in Thiruvallikeni to graze around anymore.
Yes, those houses also had those old platforms called thinnais, where people used to sit and chat. But I always wish they allowed us to rest there sometimes.
I can always rest where I can. But these days, vendors seem to shoo me away because I eat their vegetables at times. Plus, customers are scared of us hurting them. Ah, can you hear the sounds? Birds, temple chants, traffic noise, people chatting. Everything is here in Thiruvallikeni.
This is such an exciting place. Ah, can you see the election is around the corner? You know, the neighborhood shops are the best place to catch on political gossip and news. I will show you when we get there, okay?
But I see we both don't have a say in the election.
That's true. Sometimes I do wonder about the plight of Bharadiyar though, how we got killed by the temple elephant.
But we don't have elephants anymore. Where's the space or the money to maintain them?
Hey, look at those vendors in front of Bharadiyar's house. They seem to be having a nice chit-chatting time amidst their work.
Yes, look at the kitchen items they sell. It's quite unique. And you won't find these in all shops.
And see, look this side. They just leave their slippers out like this.
Yes, as I said, these vendors have become part of the community. There's so much trust here. Look at them. I said we can stop anywhere. The same goes for the scooters and two wheelers. People just stop by and buy stuff. There are so many vendors to buy fruits and vegetables from, but you can't find many fast food places here. Don't you find it strange?
Well, people here do not like to eat at neighborhood shops. It is not traditional to see Brahmin men and women to be seen eating outside, especially if they don't know who prepared the food. But people from other communities enjoy the food prepared at the stalls. Triplicane is, of course, known for its diverse restaurants, like the famous Ratna Cafe. I'm sure you know the place, and also the neighborhood Mac and Bhaji. Ah, it's almost temple opening time, and I can smell the fresh coffee from the shops.
Of course, we have the best coffee shops here. They're always full of people.
Yes, do you remember how I mentioned elections and politics are always discussed in these places? And coffee shops are where men from the neighborhood can be seen sitting, talking, sipping on their favorite filter coffee. Tea has, in fact, become quite famous among vendors and laborers from the neighborhood. I also enjoy a quiet cup of tea from time to time.
And this is indeed the place where everything happens. But all's well that ends well.
Yes, but the roads get messy here with overflowing drains. And of course, you add to the mess with your cow dung. Look how your group literally occupies the entire road.
Anyway, look at the beautiful column patterns and how interesting these images of gods are.
Ah, don't distract me. See how you're eating in the middle of the street?
That's because people feed me there. You did see how people feed me even from autos. So stop blaming me for everything. Ah, look at the yummy and fresh agatikidai that Patti is selling. and all the fresh bananas.
Yes, I see that you're already drooling. But see this side. Almost an entire family is selling flowers. And here, how even this banana seller uses phone pay? Quite progressive, isn't it?
Of course, we are digital India.
It's almost sunset. The rituals are about to begin. The streets are going to get busy. You can see people coming back from their office. I'll wait for a while to see if I can get something to eat from the visitors. And then I might head towards the beach for some evening breeze.
But aren't you coming to hear what the residents say about the place? I can see Neon heading there already.
Oh, I forgot. Let's hear them out. And then we can go together, perhaps?
Okay, so let me go back to my presentation. So as you've seen, this is just one part of the long and very complex story what we developed, and we made this as a short film so that it is more accessible for people. And some of the terms are deliberately made it in native language because that is where the reader is not just a passive. He or she takes an effort to understand what those words are, and it's very important to leave the native vocabulary in certain places to capture the essence of the discussion. So moving on to some of the thematic reflections from this whole storytelling project itself is, as you see, the first thing is public space is in Thiruvallikeni at least is not a passive backdrop, and it is alive. You see, it's shaped not only through human movement but through multi-species interaction, ritual practices, and everyday material negotiation. So take Aragi, she does not simply just inhabit the neighborhood, she participates in its meaning making, which is quite important. And her presence, was more importantly, is also woven into the temple rhythms, domestic rituals, roadside commerce, and even the waste infrastructure. As she says, feeding me is equivalent to feeding a god. Her dung is not waste, but a sacred substance. She's worshipped and neglected, revered, but also blamed. So this paradox actually reveals something very important. So public space is co-produced by humans, animals, materials, and ritual practices, but unequally. So what modern planning and design might label as disorder is another register, spiritually and socially vital. And the binaries of clean, unclean, sacred, and profane collapses, which we thought was fascinating. And urban space becomes a living ecology, layered, contested, and relational. And you can also see through the conversation how the transformation is and who benefits from it. So through Sundari's voice, we can see urban change in some of the public spaces, but also in the larger neighborhood is not neutral. And if, as you see, temple-led beautification, apartment development, all are framed as progress, but progress for whom, is the question. And vendors are evicted from traditional spots of the public spaces, livelihoods are displaced in the name of order, and sacred space itself becomes a contested space. Religion, commerce, and survival intersect very unevenly. And transformation is also visible in the built fabric. The old houses are replaced now, and Sundari says how the portico, the porches, which these traditional houses was quite useful for her to rest, but at the same time there was also we should not be romanticizing these vernacular architecture element without understanding there was also an embedded caste hierarchies who is allowed to sit in those spaces. So the shift from shared to plural lively worlds to more enclosed and controlled spatial order. But what is lost is not just only an architecture aspect, but also the relational ways and how people are inhabiting those spaces. And one thing which which was almost central to quite a lot of discussions, even in the workshops, and also know how we have viewed this entire conversation, is how the religious practices and religion structures the public space itself. So as you see in Thiruvallikeni, it is anchored around the Parthasarathi temple. But it's important to note it is not just an architectural landmark. It organizes spaces. No, almost like for 300 days a year, a deity comes out in procession, and public space is reordered through ritual, literally. No? The rhythms of the temple shapes the rhythms of the street. Vendors clustered around these streets, selling flowers, sweets, and ritual items. And all of this, whether animals or devotees, priests or commerce, all move in relation to the sacred. But we also understand space, sacred space here is not a secular ground. It's spiritually choreographed, and it is also contested space. So rituals does not simply unite, it also structures power. It shapes who's visible, who's legitimate, and who must struggle to remain. Another important theme which emerged was around the notion of environmental justice. As you see, the overflowing drains, stagnant water, animal dung, ritual waste, these are all not isolated problems. They are woven into the rhythms of the neighborhood itself. The roads get messier here. There was a humorous conversation where how Aragi is accused of having dung everywhere in the street, but it reveals also something deeper. Questions of cleanliness and disorder are never neutral. They are distributed across caste, class, and even species. So when you see ritual offerings, once was very sacred, becomes waste once their sacred moment passes. But the municipal systems or the local authorities rarely account for these culturally embedded practices. So sanitation models assume separation. Sacred and sanitary aspects kind of collapses into each other, which also says that environmental risk is also not uneven. Is also uneven, sorry. Finally, the reflection is more, kind of bringing us back to the central idea of public space as story. So in Thiruvallikeni, how public space is not only where rituals happen or vendor gather, it's where the memory circulates through gossip and rumor and intergenerational storytelling. So there is the moment where Sundari shares that there was a bomb which fell, but it was because of the Lord. It has been so the entire neighborhood was survived that event. The question here is, what does this, it is not about whether this is historically accurate or not, but the question is, what does the story do to the public space? It binds the neighborhood together. It folds global events into local devotion. It produces collective identity, and public spaces are sustained through these stories. I would like to conclude, I would not conclude, it's not a conclusion as such, but I would say that it's very important for us to understand public space is not just human designed, and it is not only by architects and planners, even by the cows wandering around these 4 streets or the Madhavidis. Space here is, public spaces here is co-produced, and there is so much of material and sensory practices aligned to these public spaces. And it carries sense, it carries reverence, frustration, it carries conflict and care. So all of these makes the public space meaningful. As we understand, it is not the transformation, whenever we look at it, is not just architectural and physical, but it is emotional, spiritual, and ecological as well. So I want to leave with some questions, I would say. So if public space is continuously told into being, and if it is co-produced by humans, animals, rituals, waste, memory, and negotiation, then perhaps we need to think about how we co-design cities with rather than for. and what if justice included multi-species well-being, and more importantly, how do we actually honor these messiness, the relational urban worlds, without erasing them through technocratic interventions? And how do we intervene without flattening, or how do we plan without sanitizing? How do we upgrade without displacing? So for us, we always, at least in this project, we thought storytelling offered one starting point, because to tell space as a story is to literally, kind of slowing down, to listen, to recognize that these spaces, whatever we are looking at, are not just abstract objects, but lived, layered, and most importantly, contested. And I think it is within this framework we would be able to understand what justice and equity means in public spaces. So thank you so much for listening. I'm very much looking forward to comments and questions or any feedbacks or observations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lakshmi, Priya. It was a very nice navigation of these voices from the streets and perceptions, open discussions, something that I really value a lot when we talk about understanding public space. So usually we invite students to observe during daytime, during nighttime, different days of the week, in the weekends, because some practices are happening without any previous, engagement or arrangement, just spontaneously activating public space. But now, with your lecture, we understand that it's not just about observing, but it is also about listening and collecting stories from the ground, from everyday life, which I believe are crucial to inform also the design. Design means upgrade, adaptation, furniture for enjoyment in public space. Because, sometimes we think that design means a big gesture or completely transformation of the existing site. But actually, those kind of observations and listenings to everyday practices just show us that sometimes even very small improvements can create better opportunities for public space.
Absolutely, and it is not so easy to actually study it every day. That is where we thought storytelling would be very helpful for us, because when we finished the project, we had like such rich data from the participatory workshop with the residents of the neighborhood. We did a workshop which was focusing on how do they imagine the future of public spaces, how they want to give suggestions about how these spaces could be used, multi-use and all of that. And we had archival research data, we had interviews, narrative interviews. We had so much information, but we did not know how to actually synthesize all of this to make sense of how these public spaces can be understood. And which is when we thought storytelling would be an ideal way to bring in the non-linearity to it, which is something which is very important for urban research, looking at public spaces. Because often if you see the methods what we use to understand or practice or teach, we always use a bit of linear sort of a method, collect data, then you do this, then you do that. But at any single point, there's so much of a overlap with multiple temporalities, and it was I would say it was quite a challenge for us. And one of the reasons why we also strategically adopted storytelling was, if you look at the context of Thiruvallikeni, as I said, it's a complex, politically layered place, public spaces, and often we think satire and humor is something which is not understood as a legitimate way of looking at a place or how we study these public spaces, but it can allow us to look at quite a lot of these very sensitive linkages between the politics space and who is allowed to work. So we kind of we were at times hiding behind humor to show the injustice, the social spatial justice and injustice which is happening. So I felt I strongly believe the importance of everyday in the public spaces, because and especially with the time component taking such different dimensions these days, temporality plays a very important role in how we experience those public spaces. If you really want to create spaces where people kind of belong or understand whether they belong or not, it's the everyday lens. And storytelling is what I find it as a very powerful way to examine, design, or understand public spaces.
Yes, I totally agree with this perspective. But how do you think we could then bring this perspective on the table of policymakers, for example, if you know about any current policy that is addressing everyday life, everyday public engagement. So do we need a policy for every day, or do we need to just leave it as a spontaneous appropriation and activation?
It's a very interesting and difficult question to answer, but the harsh reality is, like we all know, whether it's global south or global north, or whatever divisions we try to, whatever terms what we use to understand these diverse geographies, within the planning and design, everything is definitely top down, right? And while we as researchers, academics, research-led practitioners are finding it difficult to capture these complexities through the research methods, transferring it to a policy audience is definitely challenging. And one thing what we did, for example, one of the policy output, as we always say within the project, this is more like a public engagement output. The policy output was to develop a policy brief where we had to kind of flatten all the points what the residents suggested us to do. For example, using a space in front of the temple courtyard for another secular event. But when they actually mentioned that, it was laden with quite a lot of lived experiences. But when we put it as a policy, we just say there's a potential for improving this space into a secular space, which does not actually capture it. But what I also find it interesting, at least in our cases, there's quite a lot of funding or development initiatives for the public spaces having a more Western centric, like smart cities, in India, which is the famous thing which was happening. We want to create like smart streets and all of that. But as practitioners and architects and planners, if we think we can kind of bring in all these subtleties within how we create these spaces, like making a place more open in the sense it allows for multiple usage of functions in that space. And if you look at the reason why I talk about public space and we look at streets is, in Chennai or in India, in quite a lot of global context, it is so hard to understand what is public and what is not public, and what is semi-public, right? So so within the planning and the policy, it is always the street design. But when you actually look at the reality of the streets, it is the corners of the streets, how you design for people to spontaneously stand and have a conversation, or the temporal nature of the businesses which the street designs can offer might all kind of allow these informal vendors to have their livelihoods not disturbed. So I think it requires quite a lot of creative intervention if you're going to look into these street designs, and also importance of having the local situated knowledge as the design team to allow your creativity to come into the planning. But short answer to your question, there's still quite a long gap between what is happening in reality and how we can actually translate it to policy. So maximum what we could do with the story map is probably we can screen it with the residents, which we've already done. We got the feedback, but along with the residents, and also bring in the policymakers to have a conversation. But again, the reality is it requires the political will, right, to do any intervention, and then things are very systemic issue. Things are very difficult to change, but creative interventions can allow us to bring in all these everydayness into the actual design process as well.
Yes. Real world is a completely different environment compared to those rooms where policymakers are discussing about the future of cities. Okay, so now I want to just show some of the good comments that we are receiving for your lecture. So in general, there is a certain appreciation for what you have been presenting. So it's nice that, through also the Public Space Academy, we are able to bring very different perspectives, as Alessandro is writing in this comment. Because I think there is quite a recognized field in the everyday space, everyday practices, and everyday appropriation. But I think we still need to do more in terms of also how to bring to the attention of many different actually stakeholders, not just policymakers, but also in terms of research, how to make those kind of content relevant to inform research studies and new directions for let's say everyday studies, for example, because also the academic world, the research world is very much following certain standards, right? And so I was very impressed about your platform, the Collab, because actually based at UCL, so it's such a bold move, to
I know.
on
Yeah.
on this topic.
Yeah. So Louisa, everybody, most of the academics would agree, this is such a depressing phase to be as an academic, right? So I find Ecolab as such a rewarding space to be in, and whatever you're not able to actually implement or discuss at an institutional level, you could do within your own a small network, and thanks to the internet, we are able to connect to global researchers. But another point which I would like to tell the audience, since there are quite a lot of people who are appreciating the storytelling thing, I also have to confess the challenges what we had to go through when we presented this to the residents. So the challenge of creating a very accessible format of your research output is so tricky and so risky. So when we presented to the residents who were part of the workshop, who were from whom we collected the data, and some of the residents said, no, it's so nice, it reminded me of my childhood. I really want to go visit that shop and have that particular cuisine in that shop and all of that. But there was a resident who was very upset with the title of the story, and she said, you know what, whatever you presented, you need to really change. She just got up in that film screening, and she was saying, you have to change the title of your story, because it doesn't actually represent everybody in neighborhood, and you are particularly looking at one particular community, and I feel marginalized by looking at it. And it was like a revelation for us, because for us the whole idea from the beginning was about just equity, looking from peripheries. But still, as researchers, when we thought, it is not about what we think, right? It is about how it is reaching out to the audience, or reaching out to the stakeholders. Stakeholders are not the right term, but still, how are we actually showing the story to the people who are actually the key part of the story itself? And then actually what we understood was, okay, because we made it as Thiruvallikeni, initially it was a Thiruvallikeni Kadai, the story of the neighborhood. Then based on the comments of that particular person, which we thought was very, very relevant. And we made the title of the film to Thiruvallikeni Madavidi Kadai, looking at just those 4 streets. So which is why we deliberately even put it in our website, not something as a cleaned version of Thiruvallikeni Madavi. We will put a small comma, and then we put Madavidi for us to remind ourselves that what mistake we made. So that title is always written in a messy manner for us to understand it critically, reflective of the process, what we as practitioners or academics or researchers do. Because we always assume research is something which is going to be useful, and research is always good. It might really harm as well. So it is a reminder for us. So we kept the title to remind us, okay, of that person who gave us the comment to change the title. So
yes,
it is challenging, but it's very rewarding.
I can imagine. Yes, because I mean it's not just for research purposes, as you said, but it is mostly to reach and create a dialogue which is willing to collect feedbacks, as you did, from the locals.
Yeah, and we were not. Sorry to interrupt. We had an international advisory group, amazing international advisory group for the project, and we were not scared of presenting it to them, but we were so scared of presenting it to the residents, because it's like we are telling their story. Like, we are not expert, we are telling to them, right? Who are the experts? So it was very challenging, and it was very. I was very anxious, and for that presentation, film screening, to the residents and not to the International Advisory Board.
But this storytelling has been very much appreciated by our audience, because again, from Marco, who is an artist, that actually is also a member of City Space Architecture, like Alessandro before. So and so this idea that we also approach through storytelling cultural narratives, which are very important to inform, the way we design our cities. And this other one, which is highlighting the importance of incorporating these approaches into research activities. So, but your work in this Deco Lab is, because I also gave a lecture some time ago to your Deco Lab.
Yes, absolutely. So how we have actually conceptualized this Deco Lab is as a global collaboratorium to bring together like academics, students, practitioners who are interested in alternative ways of looking at, basically challenging the Western and the Eurocentric frameworks, in looking at the built environment, whether it's research or education. So so we have, one is the group set of projects, what we call as the decolonial dialogues. And then we have reimagining narratives. The outputs of the dialogues are reimagined in newer ways. For example, in this case, there's a story map. There's another case where we made an animated film. There's another project where we made an illustrated poster. And then there's another important component is the global studio, where we bring together, we conduct intensive online studio sessions across the globe with students of architecture, urban planning, and design. And that is where you kindly accepted our invite to come and talk about the public space and the importance of public space. So we have a specific theme for the studio, and students from across the globe. We had students from Netherlands to Canada to South Africa to India, Mexico, Thailand, everybody coming together and, looking at this. So all that what we say is, you're not giving a solution. You're only critically reflecting on the design, frameworks, literature, what has been told to you. And based on this, you look at this particular topic. And we had some very amazing feedback. One of the student, I particularly remember the student from Turkey. He said when we asked them, okay, what did you give some comments, and then he said, it is very nice to hear from everybody the problems in different parts of the places is all same. He thought that no, the problem in Turkey is so different from what is happening in Mexico or in Canada, and he felt that, oh my God, okay, so everywhere we have the same problems, and it's nice to make students, especially students from the built environment discipline, to think critically, because often you need to unlearn so much about the literature, what you're exposed to, the methods, what you're exposed to, what you think as practice itself, right? So the students felt, and that was what we really wanted them to do. We did not want them to add this to a very visually flamboyant portfolio, what they produce at the end of the studio, but how it helps them to understand the process, how you can challenge the dominant frameworks, methods, and theories, what they use when you design urban design projects. So we are planning to develop more thematic studios, so looking at climate justice as one of the theme, which is what I have in mind. So let's see, and which is why I'm amazed with the City Space Architecture, the Public Space Academy program, because we did one studio and it is so hard, and I mean, to bring together international set of audience and students from different time zones working on an online platform. Lots of appreciation to the Public Space Academy for getting this going. And I saw quite a lot of other keynote lectures as well, like amazing scholars talking about such relevant topics. So thanks to you once again, Louisa.
Well, thank you for joining, because I think it's always very important that we have all these different voices from very different backgrounds, with very different also research or perspective or professional development, to discuss about public space, because sometimes, most of the times, I have to say, I see public space as like a collateral component in the design activity, and not intended as a primary interest. So all this work that we do on public space is intended to answer to just one question: what if we put the public space first? So how would you reconsider, your design strategies? For example, sometimes public space arrives at some point during the process, or maybe at the very end of the process, while instead it could bring so much if it is included in the overall approach and strategic development since the very beginning.
Absolutely. Just quickly to add that point, while we always read literature which says considering city as a laboratory, I think we now need to really understand that and see how a public space can be used as a laboratory, whether you want to study about visual justice or spatial justice or social justice. So public space can be a laboratory through which you look into all the topics. So that is why I think we really need to recenter the focus with the public space, which, as I said, it is layered, it's contested, and it is in the contestation where you understand what is, it's not right and wrong, no binaries. You understand the spectrum of experiences and opportunities and potentials.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. I think we have another comment here. Sorry, I don't see the name of the user here that is posting the comment, unfortunately. Yes, but I think this is another appreciation regarding your storytelling. Yes, and the fact that you actually move beyond existing frameworks, as you said, challenging the current knowledge and current activities that are actually mostly taught in university courses, and sometimes it is also difficult to actually enrich with this kind of perspective and content, because there is this very pragmatic and linear, as you said, way of teaching, that this is considered more like a diverging route that is not giving you the fundamentals of the design activity sometimes, I know, because I have been into this kind of misunderstandings also in my teachings sometimes, but I think it is very, very important to have like your Decolab and all these kind of initiatives that are trying to, as you said, not jump immediately to the solutions, but just reflect and even ask inconvenient questions, no? Because sometimes you think you know all the solutions, but actually sometimes we should go back to the questions that are leading to certain solutions, because sometimes the questions are simply wrong or not relevant for our contemporary times.
Exactly. And as you're saying, questions are so important, and to ask the right question is the most challenging bit, and also I somehow are very not so comfortable with the word solution, or no, because I think we should instead of using solution, probably we should start using the word response, because this is something which I've seen within the in the students of architecture, urban planning, design. Immediately you need to give a solution. But see, the kind of complexity, which is the complexity is what you're looking at, whether it is housing precarity or anything. You cannot give a solution, because if you're going to give a solution anyway, it is going to create another problem. So we need to move from the solution mode to responding mode, which is more empathetic and compassionate, to the issue what we are looking at. And as I said, yes, and I really appreciate somebody appreciating going beyond the Eurocentric parameters, and some of the decisions what we made in the storytelling. For example, starting the story of the place with the rumor, or gossip, we thought was another way to challenge the cleanliness of the data, the relevance of the data, the legitimacy of data, what we use in urban research. It is these whether, as I said, it is not about whether it is true or not. It is about how that particular story changes the perception of people in the neighborhood and understanding that place. That is what we should be looking at. So these are some creative liberties and deliberate decisions what we made to start with the rumor, introduce local vernacular languages, so that we don't homogenize and take away the uniqueness of that particular topic what they're talking about. So as I said, decoloniality is a very rewarding space to be in, but as you also said, it's a very uncomfortable space to be in. But with shared purpose and coming together with shared like-minded people, it can be a very rewarding space to be as an academic research-led practitioner.
Yes. I agree. And so I'm curious now to know about your upcoming activities or events, if there is a way to get in touch with you and your work.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have the Decolab website where we update all the project activities, the public engagement, publications, workshop. We also have a podcast series which we have started, which is Unlearning Together. Which so I'd be very happy. Yeah, Unlearning Together. So I'll be very happy if anybody wants to be part of that, or collaborate for a global studio, or coming together for a public engagement event, joint write-up. You can always contact me in that through the website. You have my email ID. So very much looking forward for the collaborations. As you say, these are platforms which can only be sustained through like-minded and shared purpose, having people with shared purpose. And I think it is also very critical these days to bring in the pluriversal ways of designing spaces, and not just an alternative, because the moment you say alternative, it's like there's the other which is important and then the alternative. So it is more pluriversal ways of designing,
Yes,
understanding,
yes.
imagining is quite important, which I'll be very happy to collaborate on.
Wow, amazing. Okay, so let's plan something.
Sure.
Maybe in person, maybe at UCL or in
Yeah.
Bologna, in
Yes,
case we can
absolutely.
manage to have a session in Italy.
It'll be great, Louisa. Very much looking forward to it. And thank you once again for all the people who have joined us online to hear. And please reach out to me for any comments or questions later through email as well. I'll be more than happy to answer that. And thanks again to Public Space, City Space Architecture, Public Space Academy, this initiative, and Louisa, to you for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you. I think our audience and also myself appreciated a lot your lecture today. So if there are no questions, I don't see other questions in the chat. So probably we can close this keynote lecture. And thank you again for joining us and for your work also in the steering committee of the Public Space Academy. We actually are now presenting our upcoming activities, as I said, through our newsletter. So it is important that you are always following our work through the website, social media, newsletter, and get in touch regarding our future initiatives and events. So I think it's all for today, and we meet next month for another keynote lecture, and soon for our workshops and activities in the summer. Thank you.
Thank you.